I never imagined my life would take this turn. You spend years with someone, believing you've built a foundation of love and trust, only to realize you've been standing on quicksand. I should have seen it coming. The red flags were there. Small, almost imperceptible at first, like whispers in the wind. But when you love someone, you convince yourself that the wind is just a passing breeze, not the warning of an approaching storm. That evening, the air was thick with an unspoken tension, the kind that wrapped around your chest like a vice, squeezing tighter with each passing mile. Natalie, my wife of 6 years, sat beside me in the passenger seat, her arms crossed, eyes fixed on the road ahead, but I could feel her simmering. Her silence was calculated, like a chess player waiting for the right moment to strike. I gripped the wheel, my knuckles tightening as I anticipated what was coming. We had just left my father's house, a place that should have been a safe haven. Instead, it had become the battleground for the same conversation we had been having for months. The house, Sandcrest Villa, a legacy passed down to me, a piece of history built by my grandfather, resting on the cliffs of Clearwater Bay. To me, it was more than a house, it was home. To Natalie, it was an asset, something to be controlled, leveraged, owned. And now, sitting in that car, the setting sun painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, she was about to give me the ultimatum I knew was coming. The seconds stretched as I waited for her to speak. The only sound was the hum of the tires against the asphalt, the rhythmic thump of my heartbeat in my ears. Then, it came. "I'm done playing games, Lucas." Her voice was sharp, cutting through the fragile peace like a blade. "Either you sign the house over to me, or our relationship ends tonight." I exhaled slowly, forcing myself to keep my eyes on the road. "Are we really doing this now?" I asked, my voice steady, but inside, my nerves were unraveling. "Yes, we are." I turned my head slightly, just enough to see the determination in her eyes. Cold, unyielding. This wasn't a plea, it was a demand. I had given her everything. Support, love, a life she once claimed she dreamed of. But this was betrayal, wrapped in a silk ribbon of entitlement. "No," I said firmly. The word tasted like finality on my tongue. Natalie scoffed, shaking her head. "You're being ridiculous, Lucas. I'm your wife. This is what's best for us. For me." Ah, there it was. For her. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, my jaw clenching as the full weight of her words settled over me. She didn't even try to sugarcoat it anymore. The mask had slipped. This wasn't about us. It was about power, control, ownership. "Funny," I murmured. "You keep saying us, but the only person benefiting here is you." She rolled her eyes, her frustration bleeding through. "Why are you making this difficult? If you put it in my name, we can avoid unnecessary taxes, legal fees." "Cut the crap, Natalie," I snapped, my patience unraveling. "This isn't about taxes. This isn't about legal fees. This is about you wanting control over something that doesn't belong to you." Silence. A charged, dangerous silence. Then, she exhaled sharply. "I knew you'd be stubborn, but I didn't think you'd be this selfish." I laughed, a hollow, humorless sound. "Selfish? Because I won't sign over my family's home to you? Because I won't blindly hand over something that means everything to me?" She turned toward me, eyes burning with frustration. "Lucas, you're acting like I'm some kind of enemy. I'm your wife. Were you my wife when you started sneaking behind my back, trying to get an appraisal on the property?" I asked, my voice eerily calm. Her breath hitched, a flicker of guilt that she quickly masked with defiance. "You went through my emails," she accused. "I didn't have to. You left the paperwork on the counter last week," I said coolly. Her lips parted, but no words came. For the first time that night, she had nothing to say. Then, something changed. The frustration in her expression shifted into something darker, something cruel. She leaned back in her seat, her arms folding across her chest. "Fine," she said simply. I frowned, glancing at her. "Fine." She nodded. "If you won't give me what I want, then this is over." I let out a sharp breath. "So that's it? You're willing to throw away everything over a house?" Her lips curled into a smirk that made my stomach turn. No, Lucas. You're the one throwing everything away. I didn't get the chance to respond. Before I could process her words, she reached over, yanked the wheel to the right, and slammed the brakes. The car screeched, the tires skidding against the asphalt as my body lurched forward, the seatbelt digging into my chest. The world outside blurred, cliffs, ocean, endless sky. Then, just as suddenly, everything was still. My heartbeat thundered as I turned to her, but she was already unbuckling her seatbelt, her movements swift, mechanical. "What the hell are you doing?" I demanded. She threw open the door and stepped out, her heels clicking against the pavement as she walked around to my side. Then, she yanked my door open. "Get out," she ordered. I stared at her, my pulse pounding in disbelief. "You're joking." She wasn't. "You made your choice," she said, her voice void of emotion. "Now, live with it." I wanted to believe she was bluffing, that she wouldn't actually do this. But as I sat there, staring at the woman I had once vowed to spend my life with, I realized something. I didn't know her at all. Slowly, I unbuckled my seatbelt, my movements deliberate. My pride wouldn't let me argue. I stepped out, my feet hitting the cold pavement. As soon as I did, she turned on her heel, got back in the car, and without so much as a second glance, she slammed the door shut. The engine roared. The tires screeched. And just like that, she was gone. I stood there, the wind howling around me, the distant ocean crashing against the cliffs below. The sky had darkened now, the last remnants of sunlight disappearing beyond the horizon. Natalie had left me, stranded, abandoned, alone, over a house, over control. But she made one fatal mistake. She thought I was powerless. She was wrong. She had no idea what was coming next. I stood there, watching as Natalie's car disappeared into the night, its red taillights shrinking into the darkness until they were nothing but a distant memory. The cold night air settled around me like a second skin, seeping into my bones, wrapping around my disbelief. I let out a slow, shaky breath. She actually did it. I had known she was selfish. I had known she was manipulative. But this was something else entirely. The Pacific wind howled across the cliffs, carrying with it the distant sound of crashing waves. I glanced down at my feet, my shoes planted firmly on the asphalt of Stormcrest Highway. One side of the road sloped downward into a thick patch of coastal forest. The other? A sheer drop to the sea below. Not exactly the kind of place you wanted to be stranded at night. I checked my pockets out of habit, even though I knew I had nothing. No phone, no wallet, not even my house keys. Natalie had made sure of that. And now, here I was alone, abandoned, without a single lifeline. For a moment, I just stood there, letting the reality of it sink in. She thought she'd broken me. She thought I would be helpless out here, left to stumble blindly into the dark, desperate enough to come crawling back to her. But she had underestimated me. Because if there was one thing she didn't understand, it was that I didn't break. I endured. I turned my eyes up to the road ahead. Time to move. With nothing but the moonlight and the distant glow of the highway's occasional street lamp, I started walking. Each step felt surreal, like I was moving through someone else's nightmare. The road stretched ahead of me in an endless black ribbon, the only sounds my own footsteps and the distant, rhythmic crashing of waves. A part of me still couldn't believe she had actually left me here. I had seen glimpses of her cruelty before, but this was something new. And yet, as I walked, I felt something else stirring inside me. Relief. I hadn't realized it until now, but the moment she drove away, something inside me had snapped back into place. For too long, I had let her control the narrative. Let her manipulate situations until I was backed into corners, always trying to make peace, always the one holding our relationship together. But now I was free, and I was about to make sure she regretted every second of it. I picked up my pace, moving with renewed energy. I had been walking for nearly an hour when I saw the first set of headlights approaching from behind. I turned, raising a hand, hoping, just hoping, that maybe, for once, a stranger would be decent enough to stop. The car sped right past me. I clenched my jaw, shoving my hands into my pockets, and kept walking. Another car came. Then another. None of them stopped. I wasn't surprised. A man walking alone on a highway at night? Not exactly a welcoming sight. But then, just when I was about to give up on getting any help, I saw it. Another car, approaching from a distance, its headlights cutting through the darkness. I turned, lifting my hand again. This time, the car slowed down. For the first time that night, luck was on my side. As the car pulled up beside me, the window rolled down, revealing a familiar face. Zane. For a moment, I just stared. Zane Carter, old college friend, former Army intelligence, now a private investigator. He was the last person I expected to see tonight. Lucas? He frowned, leaning closer to get a better look at me. The hell are you doing out here? I exhaled, half in relief, half in frustration. Long story. From the driver's seat, another figure shifted, Marcus, Zane's business partner. He looked at me, then at Zane, his expression unreadable. You need a ride? Zane asked. I almost laughed. Yeah, I do. Without another word, I opened the passenger door and slid inside, the warmth of the car hitting me like a shock after the cold night air. The second the door shut, Zane glanced at me again, his eyes sharp. Lucas, what the hell is going on? I leaned my head back against the seat and let out a slow breath. Then, I told them everything. I told them about Natalie's obsession with the house, about the ultimatum, about how she had abandoned me on the side of the road like I was nothing. As I spoke, I saw Zane's expression darken. Marcus, usually the quiet one, let out a low whistle. That's cold, man. Zane shook his head. I knew she was bad news, but this? She's got a plan. People don't pull moves like this unless they think they're in control. He was right. And that was the part that unsettled me the most. Natalie wasn't reckless. She was calculated. Which meant, this wasn't just a fit of anger. This was part of something bigger. I turned to Zane. I need your help. He nodded. I figured as much. As we drove, a creeping thought started to settle in. Natalie had expected me to be stranded, alone, desperate, but I wasn't. She had underestimated me. And now, with Zane and Marcus by my side, I was about to turn the tables on her. I didn't know yet what I would find when I got back to Sandcrest Villa. I didn't know yet how deep her betrayal went. But one thing was certain, this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I didn't know what I expected when we pulled up to Sandcrest Villa, but I sure as hell didn't expect nothing. The car rolled to a slow stop in the driveway. The headlights illuminated the towering structure of the estate, the same house that had been in my family for generations. But something was wrong. Even before I stepped out of the car, a chill crept over me, not from the cold night air, but from the eerie emptiness that seemed to radiate from the villa itself. I pushed open the door and stepped out, my shoes crunching against the gravel. My heartbeat pounded in my ears as I took a cautious step forward, staring at the house. Something felt off, too still, too quiet. And then, realization dawned. The curtains, they were gone. The grand oak door that once held a wreath from my mother's collection, bare. My breath hitched. I broke into a jog, my gut twisting as I reached the front porch. The moment my fingers wrapped around the doorknob, I knew. It was empty. My pulse spiked as I shoved the door open. The creak echoed through a house that was no longer mine. Not in the way it had been before. I took a step inside, my breath coming in short bursts as my eyes darted around. Gone. The leather armchairs that once sat in the lounge? Gone. The antique coffee table my grandfather built with his own hands? Gone. The paintings that lined the hallway, the ones my mother had collected for years? Gone. A deep, sinking nausea crawled into my stomach. I was standing inside the shell of my own home. Footsteps sounded behind me as Zane and Marcus entered, their movements cautious. I heard Zane mutter something under his breath. Marcus let out a low whistle. Jesus, Zane said. She cleaned the place out. I barely heard him. I was already walking, my hands shaking as I ran them over the bare walls, the empty spaces, the echoes of a life I thought I still had. Every room, every hallway, stripped. My home wasn't just taken. It had been erased. And then, like a slow-motion horror scene, I turned the corner into the dining room, and there she was. Natalie, standing in the center of the empty room, arms folded, her face pale as a ghost. She wasn't alone. She wasn't expecting me. And for the first time, I saw something flicker across her face that I had never seen before. Fear. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air was thick with something unspoken, something dark and dangerous. Natalie's eyes darted behind me, as if calculating how much time she had before she needed to run. Too late. I took a slow step forward, letting the silence stretch. Then, calmly, deliberately, I said, "You didn't think I'd make it back, did you?" Natalie's lips parted, but no sound came out. I could almost see the gears turning in her head, trying to spin a new lie, a new excuse. But there was nothing she could say. She had left me on the side of the road to rot, believing I'd come crawling back, desperate. But instead, I walked through the front door with two men by my side. Men who knew exactly what she'd been up to. She had lost. Zane stepped up beside me, flipping open a file in his hand. "Quite a paper trail you left, Natalie," he said, his voice dripping with casual amusement. "Real estate brokers, moving companies, bank transfers. You've been busy." Natalie stiffened. "You have no right to go through my—" "Your what?" I cut in, my voice sharp. "Your personal affairs? The same way you had no right to clear out my family's home while I was stranded on the goddamn highway?" Her nostrils flared, but she didn't say anything. That was fine. I had plenty to say. Zane tossed a folder onto the empty dining table. "Here's the deal," he said, his tone almost bored. "We've got evidence of fraudulent transfers, misappropriated funds, and unauthorized attempts to sell a property that doesn't belong to you." Natalie's mask cracked. "That's not true." "It is," Marcus interrupted, stepping closer. "And by the way, we made sure to freeze the accounts before you could cash out." Natalie's face drained of color. I took another step toward her, my hands curling into fists. "Tell me something," I said, my voice eerily calm. "At what point did you decide to do this? Was it before we were married? After? Or did you just wake up one day and decide to destroy everything because you thought I was too blind to see it?" Her expression hardened. "Lucas, you're being dramatic." "Dramatic?" I barked out a bitter laugh. "You emptied my home, tried to sell my inheritance, and left me for dead on the side of the road. Forgive me if I don't take your concerns seriously." Her lips pressed into a thin line. I could see the cracks forming in her bravado. She wasn't sorry. She was angry she got caught. I leaned in, just enough to make sure she saw the fire in my eyes. "You thought I'd be broken," I said, voice steady. "You thought I'd be desperate. But here's the thing, Natalie. You made one fatal mistake." Her jaw tightened. Zane smirked. "You underestimated him." A flicker of something flashed across her face. Anger? Desperation? A last-ditch effort to regain control? Didn't matter, because control was no longer hers. I turned away, scanning the empty room, my chest tightening. This was my home. And now? It was nothing but a battlefield. But battles could be rebuilt. She, on the other hand, she had just lost everything. Slowly, deliberately, I reached into my pocket and pulled out the one thing that sealed her fate. A set of divorce papers. I placed them on the table. "You wanted my house," I said. "Now, you get nothing." Natalie's breath hitched. "You can't." I turned to her, cutting her off. "Oh, I can," I said. And I just did. The finality in my voice left no room for argument. For the first time since I had met Natalie, she had nothing left to say, and I had never felt more free. Silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. The kind of silence that precedes a storm, where the air turns heavy and you know something's about to break. I stood across from Natalie, my wife, the woman I once believed I knew. But the stranger before me wasn't the woman I married. No, this was a predator who had just realized the trap she said had failed. Her face was frozen, but I could see it. The rapid blinking, the subtle tightening of her jaw. She was calculating, scrambling, trying to figure out how to spin this. Too late. She'd made her move. Now it was my turn. I took a slow step forward, my voice calm, almost casual. "You didn't think I'd make it back, did you?" Her lips parted slightly, but she said nothing. I saw it in her eyes, the panic she was trying to hide, the realization that she had overplayed her hand. Behind me, Zane leaned against the doorframe, flipping through a folder. Marcus stood by the entrance, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. The walls were closing in on her, and she knew it. She squared her shoulders, finally finding her voice. "Lucas," she said, forcing out a laugh. "What the hell is this? Some kind of intimidation tactic?" I didn't flinch. I didn't blink. I just smiled. Not the kind of smile that comforts. No, the kind that tells you your opponent is already dead. They just don't know it yet. I gestured to the empty room around us. "You tell me, what happened to our home?" Her fingers curled into fists at her sides. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Really?" I let out a low chuckle, shaking my head. "You don't know where all our furniture went? You don't know why every inch of this place has been stripped down to nothing?" Her mask was slipping. I could see it. The way she swallowed hard, the way she avoided my eyes. Still, she wasn't ready to surrender. "You're being ridiculous," she scoffed, rolling her eyes. "I didn't do anything. If something's missing, maybe you should ask yourself who else has access to this house." Marcus let out a low whistle from the doorway. Damn, she's really committing to the lie? Huh? Natalie's head snapped toward him, her expression flashing with irritation. "Who the hell are you?" Zane chuckled, finally stepping forward. "That's Marcus. He's with me. You remember me, don't you, Natalie?" Her face barely flickered, but I saw it. Recognition. Zane had been at our wedding. He had been in our house before. She knew exactly who he was. And more importantly, she knew what he did. A private investigator. Her breath hitched. That's when it clicked. She realized we knew. Not just about the house. About everything. Zane smirked and tossed the folder onto the empty dining table. The pages spilled out, covering the polished wood. "Go ahead, take a look," he said. "Unless you'd rather we read it for you." Natalie didn't move. I stepped forward and flipped the top page over. Bank statements. Emails between her and a real estate agent. Transactions she made under a separate account, one I never even knew existed. She had been preparing for this for months. She never planned on asking me for the house. She planned on taking it. Natalie inhaled sharply, but her expression didn't crack. "Not yet. You've been busy," I said, dragging my fingers over the documents. "Trying to sell my house behind my back? Setting up new accounts so I wouldn't notice? All while playing the devoted wife." She let out a short, bitter laugh. "Do you even hear yourself? This is insane, Lucas. You're just looking for something to be angry about." I exhaled slowly, shaking my head. She was still trying to manipulate me. Even now. Even when the evidence was staring her in the face. I glanced at Zane, who raised an eyebrow, silently asking if he should take over. Not yet. This was my moment. She needed to hear this from me. I met her gaze, leveling my voice. "You thought you could leave me for dead on the highway and walk away with everything, didn't you?" She flinched. Just slightly. Barely noticeable. But I saw it. That was fear. I took another step forward, lowering my voice. "You thought I'd be stuck out there, stranded. That by the time I found my way back, it would already be too late. That I'd have no proof, no options, nothing." She swallowed hard. I leaned in just enough for her to hear every word. "You were wrong." Natalie's breathing quickened, but her eyes stayed locked onto mine. This was a woman who had never lost. Until now. I pulled out my phone and unlocked the screen, tilting it toward her. A photo appeared, a picture of her standing outside a moving truck, supervising as men loaded up my belongings. Her lips parted slightly. I swiped to the next image, an email from the real estate broker, confirming their meeting. Another swipe, a document showing her attempts to list the property behind my back. Natalie's mask finally cracked. Her hands trembled, her breath shallow. She knew she couldn't talk her way out of this one, and I knew exactly what I had to do next. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the divorce papers. Her eyes snapped to them, widening. Her voice shook as she whispered, "Lucas." "Sign them," I said, my tone unwavering. She took a half step back, her confidence shattering. "You don't mean this." I set the papers on the table beside the evidence. You wanted the house? You wanted control? I gestured around us. Now, you get nothing. She was silent. I had never seen her at a loss for words before, but I wasn't finished. I took a deep breath, letting every ounce of emotion settle inside me. The betrayal, the anger, the realization that the woman I loved never really existed. Then I said the words that ended everything. Get out. Natalie stiffened. Zane and Marcus stepped forward, reinforcing what I already knew. She had no choice, no power, no control. Natalie turned slowly, her face pale, her hands shaking as she grabbed her purse. And then, without another word, she walked out the front door, leaving behind everything she tried to steal. As the door shut behind her, I finally let out the breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. It was over. She was gone. And for the first time in years, I was free. The door slammed shut behind Natalie, but the echo of her betrayal lingered like smoke in the air. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just stood there, staring at the empty space where she had been, feeling the weight of everything she had tried to take from me. And yet, despite the anger simmering beneath my skin, I felt something else, something foreign. Relief. For the first time in years, I didn't have to pretend. I didn't have to walk on eggshells around a woman who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle between her and her ambitions. But I wasn't done. Not yet. Because while she might have walked out that door, she wasn't free of me. She wasn't free of justice. I turned back toward Zane and Marcus, who were both watching me carefully. How much worse is it? I asked, my voice steady. Zane exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. Depends on what you define as worse. I met his gaze, unflinching. All of it. Tell me everything. He nodded once, then grabbed the folder of evidence he had thrown onto the dining table earlier. He flipped through the pages, his expression tightening with every document he skimmed over. And then, he handed me the truth. I lowered myself into one of the only chairs left in the house, flipping through proof of her betrayal, piece by piece. Bank statements. She had been transferring money into an account under a fake name. An account I never knew existed. Property appraisals. She had been working with Harbor Properties, a real estate firm in Clearwater Bay, to sell Sandcrest Villa behind my back. Emails between her and someone named JM. I frowned, flipping to the next page. Who the hell is JM? Marcus stepped forward. That's where things get interesting. He reached over, tapping one of the emails with his finger. JM isn't just some random buyer. He's Jacob Monroe. The name was vaguely familiar, and then it hit me. Jacob Monroe, a business executive I had met once, years ago. The same man Natalie had introduced as a friend from work. My stomach twisted. Zane watched my reaction carefully. She wasn't just selling the house, Lucas. She was selling it to him. I closed my eyes, inhaling sharply. She planned this for how long? Zane sighed. If I had to guess, at least a year. Maybe longer. I clenched my jaw, gripping the documents so tightly my knuckles turned white. A year. A year of lying to my face. A year of manipulating me, gaslighting me, making me believe I was the problem whenever I questioned her intentions. She had been planning to gut me financially while smiling at me across the dinner table. That was what stung the most. Not just the betrayal, the performance. I let out a slow, steady breath, trying to process the information in front of me. She emptied the house. She planned to sell it. She set up secret accounts. And she was leaving me for another man. Marcus leaned against the wall, arms crossed. So, what's your next move? I didn't answer immediately. I was staring at one of the last pages in the file, a contract, a drafted agreement for the sale of Sandcrest Villa, and at the bottom, the signature line was empty. My pulse steadied. She hadn't signed it yet. She hadn't closed the deal. I lifted my gaze. How close was she to selling it? Zane grimaced. Too close. The final signing was scheduled for next week. My hands tightened around the papers. So I still have time. Zane nodded. Barely. I exhaled sharply, my mind shifting gears. Natalie thought she had one. She thought she had backed me into a corner, stranded me, outmaneuvered me. But she forgot something. I was still here. And as long as I was standing, I was still a threat. I turned to Marcus. We need to make sure she can't touch a single dollar from our joint accounts. He nodded. Already handled. Your lawyer's been notified. Everything is frozen. I smirked. Good. What about the property title? Zane pulled out his phone, scrolling through something. There's a way to protect it from being sold without your consent. We'll get the paperwork started tonight. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling. The pieces were coming together. Natalie had spent months, years, building her little web of lies, believing she had covered every angle. But she forgot to account for one thing. Me. She thought she could destroy me. She thought she could take everything and leave me with nothing. But now? Now she was the one who was about to lose everything. I pushed the folder away and met Zane's eyes. Find out where she is. Zane's lips curled into a smirk. Already working on it. The house was quiet, empty, and yet, despite the wreckage she had left behind, despite everything she had taken, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Power. She thought I'd be broken. She thought I'd be weak. But she didn't realize. Men like me don't break. We rebuild. We reclaim. We rise. I stood up from the chair, rolling my shoulders. By this time tomorrow, Natalie wouldn't just be scared. She'd be ruined. She had played a dangerous game. And now? I was about to show her what it felt like to lose. I stood in the hollowed-out remains of my home, my fingers grazing the edge of the evidence folder Zane had just handed me. My mind churned through the information like a relentless machine, dissecting every bank transfer, every real estate inquiry, every secret email thread. But it was the name that caught my attention. Jacob Monroe. A name I knew. A name I had heard in passing, introduced once as a business acquaintance by my wife. I should have known. The gut instinct I had brushed off. The way her phone would light up with messages late at night, how she turned her screen away before I could see. The business trips that never quite made sense, the hurried explanations when I asked why she had meetings at odd hours. And now, right in front of me, was the confirmation of everything I had ignored. Natalie wasn't just trying to steal my house. She was trying to sell it so she could start over with him. They had been planning this together. My grip tightened on the folder as I exhaled slowly. There was no use in asking why. The why didn't matter anymore. The betrayal was already carved into my bones. What mattered now was what came next. I turned to Zane, my voice steady. Where is she? He smirked. Funny you should ask. He pulled out his phone, tilting the screen toward me. A real-time location tracker flickered on the display. Natalie's dot was moving. Fast. My stomach twisted with dark amusement. She was running. Good. Let her run. Let her believe, for just a little longer, that she could escape this. I gestured toward the screen. Where's she heading? Zane tapped the screen twice. Looks like a hotel. 5-star. Downtown Clearwater. Marcus let out a low whistle. Must be nice, spending stolen money on luxury stays. I huffed out a humorless laugh. Not for long. I grabbed my jacket, already walking toward the door. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Lucas, you sure about this? I turned back to them, my jaw set. She thought she could strip me of everything and just walk away. It's time she learns what it feels like to lose. Zane grinned, already grabbing his keys. I was hoping you'd say that. The lobby of the Crestwood Grand was exactly what I expected. Polished floors, sleek modern decor, chandeliers dripping with wealth. The kind of place Natalie had always gravitated toward. I walked in first, my posture relaxed but my mind sharp. Zane and Marcus followed at a distance, watching my back. The receptionist looked up, offering a well-rehearsed smile. Good evening, sir. How can I help you? I leaned on the counter, my expression smooth. I'm here to see Natalie Monroe. The woman hesitated. I'm sorry, but we can't disclose guest information. Zane stepped forward, flashing a badge. It wasn't official, just a PI identification, but it was enough. We're conducting an urgent legal matter, he said smoothly. We're not asking for her room number, just a confirmation that she's here. The woman faltered, her eyes darting between us. Then, reluctantly, she nodded. She checked in about an hour ago. That was all I needed to hear. I turned on my heel, heading for the elevator. It was time to end this. When the elevator doors slid open, I stepped onto the plush carpeted hallway, my pulse steady. Room 1407. I found the door, raised a fist, and knocked. Silence. I knocked again, harder this time. Then, movement. Footsteps. A hesitation. Then, the door creaked open just a fraction, just enough for Natalie's face to appear. And the moment she saw me, she went pale. Her fingers tightened on the doorframe. Lucas. I smiled. Surprised? She swallowed hard, her eyes darting past me, probably expecting to see the police. Or worse, Jacob. I tilted my head, watching her squirm. Aren't you going to invite me in? Her jaw tightened. I have nothing to say to you. I chuckled. That's funny, because I have plenty to say to you. Before she could slam the door, I reached into my jacket and pulled out a thick envelope. I held it up just enough for her to see. Divorce papers. Her breath hitched. Lucas. I stepped forward, pushing the door open just a little more. You tried to take everything from me. But guess what, Natalie? I leaned in, my voice calm but sharp. You're leaving with nothing. Her face crumbled. She knew. She knew that the bank accounts were frozen. She knew that the sale of Sandcrest Villa had been blocked. She knew that Jacob wasn't going to save her. Because I had made sure of that, too. Before she could recover, I pulled out my phone and tapped the screen. A recording played. Jacob Monroe's voice. Natalie's eyes widened as she heard the words. Look, man, I didn't know she was still with you. She told me the marriage was already over. If I'd known. I cut the audio and tucked my phone away. He threw you under the bus, I told her. The moment he realized the house deal was off, he ran. Guess he wasn't ready to fund your little escape plan, was he? Her lips parted, but no words came out. That was real fear. Not the fear of getting caught. The fear of having nowhere left to go. I slid the divorce papers toward her. Sign them. Tonight. Or I make this much, much worse for you. Her eyes burned with something. Rage, humiliation, maybe even regret. But none of it mattered anymore. She had lost. And she knew it. I turned to leave, but before I did, I gave her one last glance. Enjoy your stay, Natalie. Looks like this is the only luxury you'll be living in for a long, long time. Then, without looking back, I walked away. Because for the first time, I wasn't the one being left behind. I walked out of the hotel and into the cool night air, the weight of the confrontation settling over me like a storm that had finally passed. Natalie was done. She had spent years building her perfect escape plan, stealing from me in plain sight, siphoning my assets, plotting to sell my home. But all it took was one night to tear it all down. As I reached the sidewalk, Zane and Marcus were leaning against Zane's car, waiting. How'd it go? Zane asked, pushing off the car with a smirk. I exhaled slowly, shaking my head. She's done. Marcus grinned. That bad, huh? Worse. I pulled the divorce papers from my jacket pocket and waved them slightly. I gave her one option. Sign, or watch everything fall apart even more. Zane let out a low whistle. Think she'll do it? I glanced back at the hotel, my stomach tightening. She doesn't have a choice. The next morning, I woke up to a notification on my phone. A scanned document. Signed divorce papers. Natalie's signature was at the bottom. I stared at the screen for a moment, my mind processing it. It wasn't just ink on paper. It was freedom. It was a final, undeniable victory. For the first time in years, she had no control over me. I wasn't bound to her anymore. She couldn't manipulate me, gaslight me, or twist my words. She was gone. I let out a slow breath and dialed Zane. He picked up on the second ring. That was fast. She signed, I said simply. There was a beat of silence. Then a chuckle. Damn, you really broke her, huh? I leaned against the kitchen counter, staring out at the ocean view. She did that to herself. Zane's voice turned more serious. You ready for the next part? I knew what he meant. Natalie had gotten off easy so far, but I wasn't done yet. Yeah, I said. Let's finish this. Divorce was one thing, but Natalie hadn't just wronged me. She had committed fraud. She had tried to sell a house that wasn't legally hers. She had transferred money under false accounts. She had stolen. And now? Now, It was time for her to pay for it. Zane had already gathered every piece of evidence we needed. Bank statements, emails, recorded conversations. It was airtight. I didn't want revenge just to watch her suffer. I wanted justice. And more than that, I wanted to make sure she never did this to anyone else. Marcus had already made a few calls. The authorities were very interested in Natalie's financial activities, especially since some of her transactions had crossed into federal fraud territory. She wouldn't just be losing me. She'd be losing everything. It didn't take long for the fallout to begin. A few days after she signed the divorce papers, her accounts were frozen. Then came the investigation. And then, finally, the charges. The news hit her fast. Natalie called me that night, her number flashing on my screen like a ghost from a life I had left behind. I almost didn't answer, but then I did, because I wanted to hear her break. The second I picked up, her voice was frantic. "Lucas, you have to stop this." I leaned back against the chair, my tone cold. "Stop what, Natalie?" "The fraud charges. The bank freeze. You know I didn't mean for it to go this far." I laughed. "Didn't mean for it to go this far? You stole from me. You tried to ruin my life. You left me on the side of the goddamn road, and you're only sorry because you got caught." She was breathing hard. I could almost picture her pacing in that luxury hotel room, realizing there was no way out. "Lucas, please," she tried again, her voice softer. "We were married. You don't have to do this." I closed my eyes, inhaling sharply. She was still trying to manipulate me. Even now, even when she was falling apart. I let the silence stretch. Then I spoke, my voice like steel. "You already did this to yourself, Natalie. And now, you're going to face the consequences." She let out a sharp breath, her tone snapping into anger. "You're going to regret this, Lucas." I chuckled. "No, Natalie. The only one with regrets is you." Then I hung up, because I was done listening. The end of Natalie Monroe. A few weeks later, I sat in the lawyer's office, signing the final divorce settlement. Natalie was nowhere to be seen. Her accounts? Drained. Her reputation? Shattered. Her plans? Destroyed. She had once stood in my house, believing she had one. Now, she had no home at all. I walked out of that office, stepping into the sunlight. For the first time in years, I was free. No more manipulation. No more lies. Just me. And I wasn't broken. I had survived. I had one. And Natalie? She was nothing more than a name I used to know. The sound of my pen scratching against the final page of the divorce settlement was the most satisfying noise I'd heard in months. One signature. One stroke of ink. And just like that, Natalie Monroe was officially erased from my life. I set the pen down, leaned back in the chair, and exhaled slowly. This was it. This was freedom. The lawyer slid the papers into a folder, nodding approvingly. "Congratulations, Mr. Carter. You're a free man." I smirked, shaking his hand. "Damn right I am." I left the office without looking back, stepping into the crisp morning air. The sun was out, casting a golden glow over Clearwater Bay, the same town where Natalie had tried to gut me financially and leave me for dead. But she was gone now. Her accounts? Frozen. Her fraud? Exposed. Her reputation? Destroyed. She had spent years scheming, believing I was a fool who would hand her everything she wanted. Instead, she had walked away with nothing. And me? I was finally moving forward. I took a slow drive back to Sandcrest Villa, the house that had started this entire war. For months, I had fought to keep what was mine. And now, it was finally mine again. I pulled into the driveway and stepped out, my eyes drifting over the estate. Natalie had done her best to strip it bare. The furniture was gone. The walls were empty. The echoes of the past lingered in the silence. But I didn't see a loss. I saw a fresh start. I walked inside, letting my footsteps echo through the halls. No more Natalie. No more lies. Just me. For the first time in a long time, the house didn't feel haunted anymore. It felt like mine. I ran a hand over the wooden banister, my mind already racing with ideas. The house had been my family's legacy. Now, it was about to become something more. Later that night, I sat in the empty living room, a whiskey glass in my hand, staring out at the ocean. Zane and Marcus sat across from me, drinks in hand. "So," Zane said, swirling his glass. "What's next?" Marcus smirked. "You gonna throw a huge divorce party now that she's officially out of your life?" I chuckled, shaking my head. "No, I've got bigger plans." They exchanged glances. "Oh." I leaned forward, setting my drink down. "This house, it's not just some property. It's got history, and I'm not just going to rebuild it for myself." Zane raised an eyebrow. "So what are you thinking?" I exhaled slowly, letting the words settle before speaking. "I'm turning it into a foundation for people like me, people who've been manipulated, stolen from, blindsided by betrayal. A place where they can get legal help, financial support, and rebuild their lives." Marcus blinked. "Wait, you're serious?" I nodded. "Dead serious." Zane let out a low whistle. "Damn, that's actually kind of genius." I leaned back. Natalie tried to take everything from me, and she thought she was smart about it. But she's not the first person to do something like this, and she won't be the last. I looked around at the house she had tried so hard to steal. Now it was going to help others. Zane lifted his glass. "Well, hell, if that's the plan, then I'm in." Marcus grinned. "Yeah, man, this is the kind of revenge that actually means something." I clinked my glass against theirs, the satisfaction so much sweeter than any revenge plot could ever be. Natalie had tried to ruin me. Instead, she had pushed me toward my purpose. 2 weeks later, the final piece of justice fell into place. I was sitting on the villa's back patio, watching the waves crash against the cliffs, when my phone buzzed. It was Zane. "Lucas, you're gonna want to see this." I frowned. "What is it?" "Check the news. Right now." I pulled up the local news site, and the headline nearly made me laugh. "EX-banker Natalie Monroe charged with fraud. Former husband's evidence leads to criminal investigation." I smirked, scrolling through the article. The authorities had finally caught up with her. Everything she had done, all the transfers, all the hidden accounts, was now evidence in a fraud case. She wasn't just broke. She was facing jail time. My phone buzzed again. Natalie's number. I stared at the screen. Then, without hesitation, I hit decline. Let her feel what it was like to be ignored. Let her feel what it was like to be powerless. I had nothing left to say to her. The next morning, I stood in front of the mirror, buttoning up my shirt. For the first time in years, I actually recognized the man staring back at me. No more games. No more manipulation. Just me. And I had won. I had reclaimed my house. I had built something new from the wreckage she left behind. And as for Natalie, she was nothing more than a cautionary tale. I walked downstairs, grabbing my keys. Outside, Marcus was waiting by the car. "You ready?" he asked. I smiled. "Yeah, I am." I had spent years trapped in a marriage built on lies. Now, I was finally free. And this was just the beginning.